Welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. This week marks the deadline to register to vote in South Carolina. And we speak with Chris Whitmire with the State Election Commission about everything you need to know about voting in the state. Also, I speak with election security expert David Levine on the details about the November 3rd election. This and more from This Week. One of the biggest South Carolina political stories this week was the first congressional district debate between Democrat Joe Cunningham and Republican challenger State Representative Nancy Mace, which covered a range of topics, including offshore drilling, climate change, race relations, and more.
My opponent is going to tell you I'm a climate denier, which is dishonest. My opponent has said that the science is settled on this. Well, the science is never settled. Scientists will tell you that. I look at the issue from every angle and try to find a solution, as I've done as a state lawmaker. Scientists once said the earth was flat, and it's not. And so these things are evolving as well.
I believe in science, and it shouldn't be that hard to say. And she may tell you one thing tonight, but she's gone on record saying she rejects the science of climate change.
I believe that Black Lives Matter.
Of course, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. This is an issue I've worked on: prison reform, criminal justice reform, women's issues, African American issues, criminal justice issues. This is something I've worked on as a state lawmaker, and I have a record of it. And of course, I support everyone's right to protest during these times. I think it's really important to hear those stories and hear those voices. I have participated in different events in downtown Charleston.
Black Lives Matter, and we need to acknowledge the racial disparities that exist in this country. I mean, take a look at this pandemic right now. While African Americans make up a quarter of our state's population, they account for almost half of the deaths in our state. It's communities of color who are deprived of access to rural broadband, who don't have proper access to health care. There are some serious racial disparities that go beyond law enforcement and into health care, into education. But let's make no mistake about it. And when acknowledging these racial disparities, there's no room for violence. None at all.
Ms. Mace, do you support the Affordable Care Act?
No, I do not. In fact, in my work as a state lawmaker, I've worked to repeal many regulations that are impeding our healthcare industry. When you have competition, you have a free market, you have freedom in the marketplace, access to higher quality of care goes up and prices go down. That's just a free market. My opponent has voted for socialism in medicine, and as he talks about prescription drugs and lowering them, the bill that he voted for was going to take away Medicaid money from South Carolina by up to 10%.
And I think we should expand Medicaid. And while I admit the ACA was not perfect, we should keep with what works, throw out what doesn't, and come together to fix everything else.
October 5th is the last day to register to vote, but can be only done by mail. Joining me now to discuss the latest details on how you can vote this November and more is Chris Whitmire. He's a spokesperson for the South Carolina Election Commission. Chris, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Gavin. Good to be here.
So, Chris, I want to start off with probably the one topic that's on everyone's mind. It's that this witness signature requirement. I want to get the latest from you about that. We've seen just recently that the State Election Commission is now appealing the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling against the witness signature for absentee ballots. This has been somewhat of a confusing process, and now this appeal is going to the U.S. Supreme Court. So kind of tell us why the commission decided to appeal that, and how can people safely cast their ballots this November if they did the same thing in June without a witness signature?
So it has been a bit confusing. Never good to have changes of the rules this close to Election Day, just over a month away. The law currently is that a witness signature is not required. Of course, this was an order by the district court earlier this month. Our board voted after that order to seek an appeal, and that direction to the attorneys that are handling this is still in effect. So the appeal is going forward. We hope to have some resolution of the matter fairly quickly. Our understanding is that that could happen in the coming days, and that will be a good thing. And so I think what voters need to know right now about it is that, bottom line, it is an ongoing court case. It's possible that things could change. That raises that question of, well, what if I sent mine in without it and then it changes, or what if I send it in now and it changes? And so, what we say about that is, our motto is every vote matters, every vote counts. And, our intention is to count ballots that were cast legally when this requirement was not in effect. And that's our intention to do that unless we were ordered by some authority not to do so. And that's just kind of hard to me to imagine that happening. So, if you can't get a witness signature, go ahead and send in your mail-in ballot without it. If you want to take all the guesswork out of this whole controversy, you can go ahead and get the witness signature. It certainly doesn't harm anything. And I think what people need to know about that is that it can be anybody, literally any other person. There's no age requirement. It doesn't have to be a registered voter. Literally any other person that sees you sign the voter's oath, they would sign, put their address on there. Mm-hmm. And the one other thing that I want to make sure everybody understands about it is that there is no controversy about the voter signing the voter's oath. So everybody has to sign that voter's oath on the envelope, and all of this is on the envelope on the ballot return.
Mm-hmm. And then, Chris, when we're talking about possibly getting anyone to sign this witness signature, what is the point of this witness signature when we get down to it? I've been hearing that it doesn't even really do anything to combat fraud, which is, again, not even something that we've seen in any widespread numbers.
That's right. So this story really goes back prior to the pandemic. County election officials for a long time have been asking legislators to remove the witness signature from the envelope because it really does nothing to help them verify that the voter signed the voter's oath. Like I said, it could be any other person, so it's not like they can look this person up in the voter registration system. They can't compare their signature to anything on file. It literally is just, they're just looking for a mark on in that line and an address underneath. So they saw, even prior to all of this controversy in the pandemic, they saw, voters' ballots not being counted in election after election for no other reason than this missing witness signature. Somebody just forgot to do it or thought they didn't have to, whatever the reason. The law said they couldn't count their ballots. So county election officials were saying, hey, we really ought to remove this. This doesn't do anything for us. And so, you move forward, the pandemic starts, the state election commission, we said, hey, our executive director wrote the General Assembly and said, with another laundry list of things that we could do to help elections during the pandemic. And one of them was, hey, county election officials don't want this thing anyway. We could remove it, and that might help some people not have to come in contact with other people in the pandemic. Now, with all that said, this subject too is that, we're not law enforcement. We have no investigative authority. We have no prosecution authority. So we wouldn't be out using this information to investigate voter fraud. So whether this would be helpful to law enforcement investigator, a prosecutor in investigating potential voter fraud, I really can't speak to that. That would be more of a law enforcement question, but for us, for election officials, it really doesn't do anything for us.
Yeah, and it sounds like it does more harm than good because you're throwing away ballots, it sounds like, at the county level in some circumstances without this signature. So why fight it, I guess? What's the point behind fighting it if it doesn't serve really any purpose?
So the State Election Commission Board voted to seek the appeal, and the chair in making his vote noted that said the appeal is happening anyway. There are other defendants. The appeal is happening anyway, and I would rather have a seat at the table. And that's really the only insight I can give on why the board voted for the appeal. That's where we're at.
And Chris, at this point, if the Supreme Court does uphold the appeals court decision for you not to have this witness signature, do you think that might be the end of this thing, that lawmakers might be, hard-pressed to keep it on the books at that point?
Yeah, so that's what I was alluding to earlier, that hopefully there's a quick resolution coming. Either the Supreme Court says, no, we're not going to hear it, and that's the end of it, or the Supreme Court sends it back to the Fourth Circuit, which I believe effectively that would likely be the end of it, because a trial and everything that would have to happen at the Fourth Circuit would be past Election Day before that was resolved. So we may have some resolution here fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about things that are in place right now for the safe and secure election, do you feel like the legislature did enough to ensure that we have as much, accessibility both for absentee and in-person voting that they could have? I know there was a list of things that Director Andino wanted to see done, but we only saw really one or two things done there when it came to just having the general election be like the primary election where you can vote without an excuse.
So certainly a good thing that everybody can vote absentee now. So everybody has 3 options to vote: absentee in person, absentee by mail, election day. They gave us a little more time to process those absentee by mail ballots, which is a huge issue. We're working on triple the record right now of absentee by mail ballots in the state. So we got a little more time. We went from Monday morning to Sunday morning when we can start opening those outside envelopes, and then an extra 2 hours on election day where we can start opening the interior envelopes and scanning ballots. So that's helpful. We made some suggestions and recommendations, and it's up to the General Assembly to make those changes. And we're certainly pleased in what we got. There are some other changes that a lot of people might not be aware of. One is the shortening of the application deadlines. If you want to vote absentee by mail, it used to be you had to get your application in by October 30th. They moved that up to October 24th, so there's a new deadline there that everybody needs to know about. If you want to vote absentee by mail, got to get that app in by October 24th. So there are some changes that we didn't necessarily ask for, but were made in the legislation as well. But backing up out of all the minute details, I mean, the big thing is that everybody can vote absentee, and we got a little more time to help us out, and I think that's a good thing.
We have about 3 minutes left, Chris, and I want to cover a few more things, but there's a lawsuit pending that could possibly jeopardize the fact of folks voting absentee under the excuse of, we're in an emergency, we're in a pandemic under the governor's orders. Someone's challenging in a lawsuit the governor's ability to issue those executive orders. How could that maybe throw this into another spin?
So I'm really not aware of the merits of that case or where it's at. We're moving forward with everybody voting absentee. That's kind of hard to imagine that changing, but certainly we would abide by any court order that comes down, and it would certainly be confusing to voters if that were to change at this point.
And Chris, what's election day going to look like? How safe, how ready are you guys? Are we going to see consolidated precincts again? Are we going to see fewer precincts? Are we going to see lines? What's going to look like on November 3rd?
So we have encouraging word from counties on that we don't see nearly the amount of polling place moves that we saw in June. I've seen a couple, literally a handful throughout the state. Now that can change as we get closer to election day about polling place moves, but nothing like we saw in June. Poll managers, thank you to all the South Carolinians that have stepped up since we really started trying to recruit heavily new poll managers back in April. We've had 19,000 new poll manager applications come in. So counties are good right now on poll managers, which is encouraging. We're doing all of the same safety procedures at the polling place on election day, the mask and gloves and sneeze guards and hand sanitizer and cleaning and social distancing. So we're trying to make in-person voting as safe as possible.
And Chris, with less than a minute left, I want to ask you just what should people be looking for? There's been worry about disinformation, confusion after election night and going forward. Where should people be looking for direct information, and what should they be listening to in terms of if there's delays in counting?
So there's a lot of people trying to do good work to educate people on how to vote, right? But my message is scvotes.gov, scvotes.gov. So there's all sorts of information out there, but if you have a question, go to scvotes.gov. If you don't find it there, ask your county election officials, ask us, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at scvotes. And I missed the second part of your question.
I think you covered it pretty well there. We're just trying to figure out, make sure that, if there's any confusion on election night and going forward, that you guys are going to be the definitive source on what's happening in the state, is my understanding.
Yeah, and on delays, we're not expecting, any kind of days-long, week-long delays that I think some people are concerned about. It's still possible a county could go into the next day with the amount of absentee by mail we have, so we just have to look out for that.
Because you are seeing record numbers at this point and expect record number in person too?
Yes.
Gotcha. Well, Chris, we appreciate talking with you. That's Chris Whitmire. He's a spokesman for the South Carolina Election Commission. Chris, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Joining me now to discuss election security and potential threats is David Levine. He's an election integrity fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy. David, welcome back. We last spoke with you in February. So much has changed, and we're glad you're back, and we want to talk about those changes.
Gavin, I'm thrilled to be back, and thanks for having me.
So I want to start off, David, just kind of give us a nice big overview about, what you're seeing when it comes to current domestic and international threats to the November 3rd election at this point.
Sure. At the Alliance for Securing Democracy, we're obviously a bipartisan transatlantic organization that focuses principally, right, on authoritarian threats to democracies, right? And those are threats from countries such as Russia, China, and Iran to our democratic institutions, including elections. And so, as the Elections Integrity Fellow, I'm principally focused on those threats from our adversaries, and to sort of boil it down in a nutshell, I'm looking at two different kinds of threats. Right? First, I'm looking at threats that are of the disinformation variety. In other words, threats where adversaries are trying to influence the hearts and minds of American voters by either conducting social media and/or disinformation campaigns that are designed to undermine confidence in American elections. And I'm also focused on efforts by foreign adversaries such as Russia to try and tinker with or interfere in our actual election infrastructure. When I say election infrastructure, I'm referring to things such as our voting machines, our voter registration systems, and our election night reporting websites.
Mm-hmm. And so far, what are you seeing in terms of, when you're looking at both of those, misinformation and actual infrastructure of our states and our country's infrastructure?
Sure. I think let's first touch on the disinformation piece. What we have seen in our law enforcement and intelligence communities have borne this out is that a slew of foreign adversaries, including Russia, right, China, and Iran, have been disseminating disinformation in an effort, right, to sow discord, cause confusion and chaos, and lessen voter confidence, right, in our 2020 election. On the flip side, we've seen Russia principally, right, attempting to try and both spread disinformation about their efforts to breach our election infrastructure, as well as potentially trying to breach different parts of our election infrastructure. And so, obviously in 2016, we know through the Mueller report and the Senate Intelligence Committee's reports, we know that Russia tried to breach our election infrastructure. For example, they tried to modify and alter voter registration system data in at least one state. And it's something that I, as well as many others, are following to try and help ensure that that issue doesn't arise again here in 2020.
And David, when we look at 2016 to now 2020, should we feel more confident in at least the safeguards that have been put into place, maybe things behind the scenes that the average American doesn't really know what's going on when it comes to everything that the intelligence community does and election officials do? Should we feel more confident that there has been an improvement at least since 2016?
The short answer is yes. Every voter that goes to vote, right, should feel confident that their vote will be cast and counted. And I think that's a really important message, right, for all voters, including, right, those that have already requested ballots and those that still haven't yet made a plan to vote for November. In terms of the steps that have been taken, there are a number that have been done that I think should give people greater assurances about 2020. Number one, we've seen the federal government play a much more active role in helping secure the election infrastructure. Led by the Department of Homeland Security, we've seen the federal government play a much more supportive role towards state and local election officials. There's now more vulnerability scanning being done of a number of different pieces of election infrastructure to both prevent attacks, identify any potential issues, and work with state and local election officials so that if there are certain kinds of attacks that are made and they happen to be successful, state and local election officials are able to recover. On the other hand, we've also seen state and local election officials take steps to secure their systems. And one of the biggest things that they've done is introduced what I call sort of analog processes so that if their election infrastructure goes down or experiences issues, we still have backups in place. And to give you an example, right, we see an increased number in state and localities using paper-based voting systems, including, right, the state of South Carolina. We also see a number of states and localities that are using post-election audits to verify and validate those results. And that's really important too, because if there's an issue, for example, with a vote casting device, if you have a post-election audit, you're able to validate and see whether or not anything nefarious may have occurred and ensure that, in fact, right, the paper ballots are ultimately the records that are going to be used to certify the results. And so I think we've seen a number of steps taken to ensure that our systems are even more secure than they were in 2016.
Gotcha. It's encouraging news. And yeah, last time we spoke, we were talking about the new election systems that our state bought, because now we have a paper trail, so there's that verification on that end as well. Dave, I want to talk a little bit about some recent ransomware attacks we've seen in the country, and also reports of several states, 14 states, having emergency 911 services go down at some point recently. The New York Times reported recently that just a few well-placed ransomware attacks in key battleground states could create the impression that voters everywhere would not be able to cast their ballots, or that the ballots could not be accurately counted. And that's what cybersecurity experts would call a perception hack. Are you aware of that term? Is that something that we need to be more aware of, that even just one or two things that could maybe shake the confidence in technology could ripple into the election?
No, I think that's an excellent point. Perception hacking is a term I think that was coined by Professor Nate Persily at Stanford. I think that phrase is dead on, right? One of the things I think that's important is we have to be mindful about whether adversaries could actually try and hack the election infrastructure. But as the Department of Homeland Security and FBI put out in one of its most recent warnings, one of the other concerns is whether foreign adversaries are going to share information suggesting that they're able to successfully, in fact, breach our systems, even if they haven't been able to do so. And ransomware attacks is an example of both of those pieces. It is one of the things that the Department of Homeland Security has been focusing on like a laser with state and local election officials, in terms of, number one, being able to put measures into place so that you're able to try and prevent one. Number two, putting measures into place to being able to detect attack. And number three, being able to put measures in place so that you can recover from one. And so I think it's something that we need to continue to be vigilant about. And I know it's something that state and local election officials are certainly being mindful of as they ramp up and put in their final preparations ahead of the November election.
David, switching from maybe hacks and cybersecurity threats, I want to ask you about voter fraud. FBI Director Christopher Wray recently told lawmakers that the FBI had, quote, not seen historically any kind of coordinated national voter fraud effort in a major election, whether it's by mail or otherwise. So is it safe to assume that that will be the case for this year too, and that maybe these concerns, people, even the president talking about, voting by mail not being safe, even though he does it himself, are overblown, and that we can have faith in this system?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Voter fraud is exceedingly rare. The FBI director is spot on. Anyone who makes the case that voter fraud is anything other than exceedingly rare is making a point that aligns with disinformation rhetoric that's emanating from our foreign adversaries. And that kind of rhetoric has no place. And it, frankly, further sows chaos and confusion and can create more discord ahead of the 2020 election process. Mail-in voting is a secure process. It's been a secure process, right, since it came about during the Civil War. It's a secure process now, as the Department of Homeland Security recently reaffirmed in a report it put out. And it's a process that if voters choose to exercise, they can feel confident that their vote will be cast and counted properly.
And what do you make of the president's recent comments, too, when he was asked about a peaceful transfer of power, and he was kind of unwilling to say that he would do it that? I mean, and then you also hear recent comments from him during the debate this week where, Wired magazine had a headline that said the president pushed 11 lies about voting in 8 minutes, including about ballots being thrown into rivers and elsewhere. Does that shake the confidence in the election? Or I mean, even if people can see through it, it still, I'm guessing, has an effect on some.
I think rhetoric that's not based in fact and that doesn't have evidence to support it is concerning, and it has It certainly has the potential to, at the very least, cause confusion, if not to undermine confidence. I think it's really important also to note another thing, right? Election security is about solving problems, right? Creating fires that you then have to put out, right, is not what election security should be about. Peaceful transition of power, the security of mail-in voting, right, and the accepting of election results. These are three things that traditionally major candidates from both political parties have been able to get behind. And the fact that we have to spend time, right, treading over this ground at this point in time when we have actual threats that we need to be mitigating and dealing with is a real concern, right? State and local election officials have too much on their hands and too little time to be dealing with things that, quite frankly, have no basis in fact, right? So I'm going to put it out there and say it just one final time. Mail-in voting is a secure voting process. It's a unanimous opinion expressed by election experts, right? The peaceful transition from one president to the next is at the heart of our democracy and shouldn't be in question. And the final results need to be accepted because anything other than that, right, strikes at the heart of what we are about here as a democracy.
Yeah, very well said. And David, we have to leave it there. But again, very key points there, especially about our democracy. That's David Levine. He's an election integrity fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy. David, thanks again for making time.
Thank you.
For South Carolina ETV, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.